Yeah, so Augusta National is obviously the most iconic and historic venue in the game of golf, but it's also a very unique and different course. There are a lot of um, very odd and just otherwise unique features at this course. First of all, it's incredibly sloped all over the place. There's massive elevation changes. You're going to be hitting off hills in the fairway. There's going to be different slopes. You want to leave yourself in the right spot of the fairway because there's a lot of dog legs. Angles are a big part of this course as well. And then also the greens are some of the most undulated that you see in the entire world. They're incredibly sloped. They're known for giving players fits. They're ridiculously fast, and it feels like, at least for the guys who have played here a handful of times, it almost feels like you either know how to putt here or you don't. There's really no middle ground, which is something, kind of to look into, I think, this week. Guys who have performed well on these greens in the past is certainly an important feature. But there have been some changes to Augusta National over the last couple of years, Joey. Both of the par fives have been lengthened. Last year, it was the par 5 15th hole. They kind of cleared some trees out and changed it up a little bit and added some distance there. They also added 35 yards to the par 5 13th hole this year as well. And that supposedly has made it a lot more difficult to go for the green in two. It's going to force a lot of guys to lay up. And we even heard Bubba Watson and Patrick Reed talk about it in their media interviews, saying that it's probably not going to generate as many eagles as we've seen in the past because guys are going to have to hit 3-iron or 4-iron rather than 6-iron or 7-iron like we've seen in previous editions. So that's one thing to consider, the added distance to Augusta. And in fact, this is going to be the longest edition of the Masters in tournament history, now stretching 7,545 yards. Low key, I don't know if this gets talked about enough because I feel like the massive changes in elevation and the greens and the slopes and just the pristine conditions of Augusta kind of take the center stage, but it's a beast. I mean, 7,550 yards, it's absolutely no joke. And you go and look at some of the hole breakdowns. 9 of the 10 par fours are at least 440 yards. 3 can get up over 500 depending on the tee boxes. So driving distance, I think, is something that you really do have to consider here, especially when the conditions, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a second, aren't looking all that good for the week ahead. It sounds like there could be a lot of rain and a lot of cold temperatures. The ball's not really going to be traveling all that far. So I do think that could give bombers a little bit more of an advantage. So that's something I think you really got to keep in mind. Players who can poke it out there a little bit farther. That's not to say that short guys can't win. We've seen that plenty of times in the past, but at the end of the day, this is still a major championship. The course has been extended. We usually see some of the longer players, usually the best players in the world, though, are the longest. It only kind of makes sense. Usually wind up winning this event. So those are kind of the things that I'm looking for. As far as key stats, strokes gained approach, it's going to be really massive. I think strokes gained tee to green in general is just really, really important this week. I mentioned the driving distance. I think short game is something that you're going to want to look into as well because no one goes clean around Augusta National. It just doesn't happen. And if this does wind up being one of the more difficult years, you're going to have to get up and down from tricky spots. And then I think par 4 scoring is also another thing that I'd be looking into as well, considering I mentioned 9 of the 10 par 4s are at least 440 yards. The guys that can pick up strokes on those holes, I think, are going to be able to have a leg up. So those are kind of the things that I'm looking at when going down player profiles and selecting the players that I want to go through this week or running a model. Those are kind of the key statistics that I'm looking at. And last thing, Joey, before we go and dive into the betting board here, I mentioned the weather. The weather is always a huge staple and determining factor of how difficult the Masters is going to play, right? We saw it get a little bit tricky last year. The conditions weren't all that good on Thursday and Friday. Scotty Scheffler ends up winning this thing at I think it was 9 under, I believe. I think it should have been 11 under, but he, kicked around the ball on the 18th green there and like 4-putted his way to a 3-shot victory. It was ridiculous. But anyways, the forecast for this week, Joey, looks pretty miserable, if I'm being honest. Thursday looks fine, but Friday, Saturday, there is expected to be huge storms, at least as of now. Take this all with a grain of salt. That weatherman's not always right, to put it nicely, but there's supposed to be a lot of rain. And then even on the weekend, temperatures getting into the 50s and maybe the 60s on Sunday. So it could be a cold Masters. It could be really wet. I know Augusta National is known for having sub-air systems, not only on the greens, but in the fairways too, so they could suck out any pooling water. And the course conditions aren't going to be miserable, but I still think you can't deny the cold temperatures and the rain. The ball won't be traveling far. As of right now, it looks like this seriously could be one of the most difficult and strenuous Masters we've seen in recent years. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Maybe you want to profile players who play well in the wind or difficult conditions or in the cold, or maybe you want to target some more European players who are used to playing in the elements a little bit more in that style of golf. There's a lot of things to consider going into this week, Joey. It's going to be absolutely fascinating. It's still rattling my brain a little bit about how I want to go about my card and exactly who I want to pick, because there's so much going on. But at the end of the day, Augusta is one of my favorite places. I love this course. I feel like I've gotten a decent grasp of it. It hasn't necessarily turned into winning in the past few years. I actually haven't won a major since DJ won the Masters here in the fall edition of 2020. So hopefully I can rewrite the script here a little bit and get back on the right side of things.